Excellent. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us this morning and everyone else. I'm sure more people will join as we go. Um, what I really enjoyed the first time I met Tom for the first time is the simplicity that he shares when he talks about the principles. And one of the things that I really appreciate about him is the work he's doing in terms of his research and the papers he's writing. So I have shared some of this previously. And I'll share that again. I do have a couple that I have my email box that I'll share on the group. But when I started on the principles and I started approaching organizations, a lot of people will always say, "Where's the research? Where's the data? Show me about this, show me about that." And the work Thomas Kelly has done is always something that I went back to. And as I said, Michael Neal said, "How good can you stand it?" A book that was one of my first books I read about the principles, and it really simplified this understanding for me. And I really enjoyed the book and always been following Thomas Kelly and always invited him back almost I think it's probably every 9 months. And I think I've had him now 3 times in the group coming in to talk to us about his work, the work he's doing, some of the research he's doing. And in particular today, I've asked him to come and talk to us a bit more about his background, to share his journey, but talk about the failure of modern psychology and in his view, what leads to freedom from stress, worry, and anxiety. So without further ado, Tom, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hand over to you. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome, Roan. I just want to appreciate all that you've done to bring this understanding to people in Australia and other places, probably all over the world. It's very, very important, this understanding. The more I look at the world and what's going on, I just feel privileged because I know, I wish it would happen in my lifetime, perhaps it will, but I know this understanding is going to take over the fields of psychology and other fields as well. I mean, it has to. One of the reasons it hasn't is because it's so simple. One of the reasons psychology has failed to really live up to its expectations is because psychology has become so complex, so lost in the content of its thinking. 450 different psychotherapies at last count. And such complexity. I was talking to Rowan before we started about a paper that Jack Pransky and I are writing. And it was a paper that I started where I asked Jack to join me when I found an article in the Journal of Positive Psychology where the researchers in the journal had gone over all of the critiques and criticisms of positive psychology and came up with 117 distinct criticisms of the field. I mean, literally, scholars are questioning the effectiveness of its methodologies, its measurements, its theories, its interventions in terms of their ability to replicate their findings. Literally, its credibility as a science is being questioned. And when I read this, my attention had kind of gone off of positive psychology over the past several years while I've been writing about the principles. And the reason that what I was reading influenced writing this paper was when positive psychology first came into vogue back in the year 2000. And some of you may know its original founders were Martin Seligman, and another fellow by the name of Mahai Csikszentmihalyi or something like that. He was the fellow that started flow, the idea of flow. And what happened after the field started officially in the year 2000, a journal called the American Psychologist, premier journal of the American Psychological Association, put out a whole issue focusing on positive psychology. And I read the issue and realized, what we've got here is another psychology, this one focusing on the positive, but using the same outside-in perspective, the same outside-in paradigm as mainstream psychology. And so I wrote to the journal, and since we're writing the paper, I've got it here. I'll read you the comment that the journal published that I wrote back in 2001. Only universal principles can bring discipline to positive psychology and provide a consistent standard by which to judge the truth and integrity of its findings and propositions. Without a commonly accepted principle-based foundation, positive psychology, like traditional psychology, will inevitably splinter into an ever-increasing number of separate and often competing theories, practices, and areas of specialization, each with its own research agenda based on its own set of variables. In turn, the efforts of positive psychology to learn and evolve will be made separately and simultaneously, rather than systematically and in concert. And that was published as a comment in the journal. I invited positive psychology to take a look at these principles. But as far as we know, my invitation was not taken up, was not accepted. Interestingly, about 3 years later, in another paper that I did that was published in a journal called Adolescence, and it was a paper that I think was titled Positive Psychology was talking about taking these positive ideas to help the mental health of adolescents. And so my paper was, is it a false promise or is it going to happen? And in my paper, I predicted, no, it's not going to happen, because it can't happen without the understanding of principles. And that journal was published, and I actually used the principles to comment on Seligman's learned optimism, Goleman's emotional intelligence, Buss's evolutionary perspective. All of these perspectives looked at the source of mental health as something out there. So why has positive psychology failed? Why has traditional psychology failed? Very simply, because what they've done is they've taken either mental health or mental illness, and they've correlated with things out there. And there's all kinds of things that will show a correlation between mental illness and stuff out there, and between mental health and stuff out there. And so they've got all these correlations between mental illness and mental health with stuff out there. And then they develop theories to try to explain these correlations. So they're developing theories to explain the outside-in relationship between mental health and mental illness. And all they're doing is coming up with more evidence to prove their own theories. And I don't know if that makes sense. But basically what you've got in positive psychology is you've got people that are focusing on forgiveness. You've got researchers that are focusing on well-being. You've got researchers that are focusing on love. You've got researchers that are focusing on each component of mental health, rather than understanding that the entire cadre of symptoms of what we call mental health are built into all of us. It's the experience that we all have when our minds, our consciousness clears of the byproducts of misusing the psychospiritual system. We live in a system. You know, Sydney Banks said, every system, ecological, physiological, mechanical, any system that's out there is operated by principles. There are principles behind the operation, or that explain the operation of every system. And those principles are operating constantly, and they're impersonal. In other words, the principles that operate the gravitational system, it's of no consequence to those principles if a young child doesn't understand how the system works and innocently falls out of a second-story window. Now, we would all be upset about that, and we'd all feel compassion for that child. And we'd all see the innocence of it too, wouldn't we? I mean, if you don't understand how a system works, and then you innocently misuse it, or use it in an unhealthy way, the principles don't care. The principles just do what they do. And if you understand how the principles operate a system, any system, Roan is into computers. He has a much deeper understanding of computer programming and IT than I do. And my guess is that he can use the systems a lot better than me. Even with the gravitational system, there are deeper and deeper levels of understanding. Who were those people? The Wallendas, weren't they? The people that used to walk tight ropes between one building and another, the great Wallendas, I think they were. I think the father eventually fell. The Olympics are coming up, and we have these young people that get up on these seahorse boards or whatever, and they do flips on these boards that are maybe 6 inches wide. Well, these people have a deep, deep level of understanding of the principles behind gravity and balance. And guess what? They're able to use those systems in ways that I can't do it because I don't have that level of understanding. So it's no different with the human psychospiritual system. The principles that Sid saw were there all the time. They're not new. They've always been there. They always were. Same as electricity. Electricity was always there before people discovered it. It's always there. And so what Sid did that really was an incredible contribution was that he was able to show us how those principles interact to operate the human psychospiritual system. Way back, William James actually came up, unbeknownst to himself, with a group of principles that he called thought, consciousness, and absolute mind. Same principles. He just wasn't clear how they work together to operate the system. And The vast majority of people out there don't understand how the system works. I'm doing a paper now on forgiveness. One of the examples I use in the paper was one of the Hamas soldiers that came into Israel, and this may be sensitive for a lot of people, but it's not my goal. It's just to use this as an example. And before he left, he was killed, and they all brought in cameras so they could film what they did, and they brought in and there was sound, and so this 20-year-old young man was in, and they got his sound, and they heard him call his father and say, "Father, Father, I can't believe this. I've killed single-handedly 12 Israelis. Praise me, praise me." Now, why did I use that example? And I'll tell you why. Because nobody can behave beyond their conditioning, beyond their state of mind and their level of understanding of how the system works. We're all human animals. We're subject to conditioning. Imagine this 20-year-old had been conditioned from day one to hate Israelis, to think that it was perfectly okay that they be killed. And there he was asking for praise from his father. Makes perfect sense when you understand how the system works. Now, if people can understand that, then those people could forgive this young man, not the act, not the act. If he was caught alive and I was living in Israel, I would want this young man locked up because his level of understanding is very poor. And his conditioning, unfortunately, is a danger to me. And so he should be locked up. Hopefully, there would be a 3 principles program that could go into the jail and perhaps help him out. But until that, he wouldn't be released. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are released from prison who have not had a shift in understanding of how the system works. And there are some people in prison who without even hearing about the principles, have an insight that gives them understanding. That can happen. So let me talk a little bit about how the system works for people who, how it looks to me. There's a power behind life and all living things. There's a power that allows me to be alive. A power that when I'm born is operating me. And banks refer to that as universal mind. It's an intelligent life energy that we're all a part of. And that energy powers the other 2 principles. It powers the principle of consciousness. And consciousness is just simply the power that allows me to be aware of my experience. Without consciousness, I would not be aware. And then there's thought. And it's interesting. Thought we're doing another paper on free will. Do human beings have free will? Well, thought. Most people don't realize that we're just simply thought receivers. Right now, thoughts are just simply coming to mind for me. I don't know what I'm going to say 5 seconds from now. I know what I'm pointing toward, and so I could probably give you flavor of those thoughts, but I don't know what I'm going to think. Thoughts are just simply coming to mind for me. We're receiving thoughts. When we're born, we don't even know we're thinking. But we're thinking, we're having thoughts all the time, aren't we? We're not trying to think. We're using the power of thought in a natural, innate way. We're born using the power of thought without even knowing we're thinking. And we're experiencing mental health most of the time, if not all the time. So it's interesting. You want to look at a correlation? Look at the correlation between the thinking going on, the thoughts in the minds of very young children and their mental health. And I think you're going to find a very strong correlation between using the power of thought in that way. We call it original thought or primary thought, natural thought. It's the kind of thinking that happens when we're not trying to think. That thinking is always there. It's what creates flow. It's another term that's used when we're just fully present in the moment, trusting this incredible resource of innate, natural, primary thought to guide us. But you see, most people don't know that. If you ask most people, how much time do kids who are 1 or 2, 3, who are not being abused or neglected, how much time do they spend experiencing the qualities of mental health? Curiosity, happiness, well-being. My students at Wayne State will say, oh, 90%, 95% of the time. Then I'll ask them, they're now 20. Well, how much time do you spend in that? And if I get an 80%er, that's rare. On average, it's like 50%, 40%, what have you. And I'll ask them why. Why were you at 90, 95 when you were 2 or 3, and now why are you at 40? And most of them will say, they'll say, well, I have problems now. I didn't have problems back then. I've got responsibilities now. So again, there's this illusion that people's mental health goes down as a result of circumstances, things out there. And that's a common belief in our culture. That's where stress comes from. Stuff out there. Everybody believes it, as we get together. Well, how's your life? Well, yeah, this shit going here and my wife's there and whatever. Yeah. Okay, well, good. I feel more comfortable now because, we're all in the same boat. We have a certain amount of mental illness we've gotten used to, but that's how it is in life. Time goes by and you struggle, and that's how it is. It's unfortunate. It's an innocent misunderstanding of what mental health is and where it comes from. Mental health is innate. It can never be destroyed. It exists undamaged within all of us. And the only thing that can obscure it or get in the way is our own innocent misuse of the human psychospiritual system. And how do we misuse it? The only thing we've got a say in is how we relate to our experience. Our experience is just happening. We're having thoughts. We're living in this kaleidoscopic experience. Remember those old kaleidoscopes where you'd look in and you turn the thing and the beads kind of change? And that's how it is for us. Our thoughts are changing, and so our experience of life is changing. And we don't have much control, if any, in many ways, over the thoughts that come to mind. They just do. But we have complete free will and free choice about how we relate to our experience. And the system is perfectly designed to let us know when we're misusing it. And the way we know, funny, I'll ask my clients that I see in my private practice, Um, how do you know when something's wrong with your body? They'll think about it and they'll go, well, I suppose if I have some pain or not feeling comfortable, or I go to the doctor and they find that my numbers are outside of the norm. Uh, okay. So is physical pain your friend? So if I ask them that first, they won't get it, because it's hard to see pain as being your friend, but it is. If you didn't have physical pain or something going on, you wouldn't know something was wrong. And it's the exact same thing, as far as I can see, with psychological pain. Psychological discomfort is the system, the intelligence of the system, telling us that we're misusing it. Now, most people don't like that. I mean, most people don't know that. I'm sorry. Most people don't like physical pain or emotional pain. That's true. But to make that analogy with physical pain, I mean, if people knew that from day one, like if you've got a toothache, it means something was wrong with your tooth. I can't imagine what a difference that would have made in my life if I'd have known not to honor the thoughts that I was having when I was in a discomforting state of mind. But I remember as a kid, I would get those thoughts because I learned to misuse the power of thought very early to create an ego where my worth in my mind was connected to getting all A's in school. And I remember there was one teacher, I went to the bathroom, and back then we had bathroom captains, kids who would stand outside the bathroom. And if you did anything wrong in the bathroom, that kid would come back and report it to the teacher. And so I got reported, and the teacher gave me a check. Now, check wasn't good. Couldn't sleep. Got up, went down, and crying. My parents were there. And of course, oh, Tom, what's wrong? And we talked about it, and all of that. And then I felt more comfortable, not really because they showed their love for me, but their love for me allowed my mind to clear. But I didn't know that was why I felt better. Just knew I felt better. Probably created a little dependency for feeling better with me and my parents, because I thought it was them making me feel better. I'm having a thought right now that probably is one reason why a lot of relationships don't work later on. Because you marry somebody, or you have somebody and you think, okay, now that person is going to make me feel better. Good luck. Good luck. But it's innocent because people don't understand how the system works. I guess I'm looking for some direction here. Or some questions about that, or maybe something you want me to go into more deeply. I didn't realize I've already talked for a half hour.
Just maybe see if there's any questions around the traps. If anything you want Dr. Thomas Kelly to clarify, to go into more details.
Well, I don't know if I actually finished how the system works. I think I
Yeah.
more or less did. We're getting these thoughts. The thoughts are being brought to life by consciousness. We're experiencing. We're living in this illusion created by thought. I had a client today who is, I suppose he would have been diagnosed as paranoid personality or whatever. He thinks people are putting stuff in his food when he goes to the restaurant, and people are following him and stuff like that. And I feel bad for this guy because it really looks that way to him. And it was interesting when we first met and I heard what he was saying. I had a lot of thoughts. One, now that I understand how the system works, I understand what's going on for this fellow. So I realize he's a good person. He's having thoughts that are creating these illusions. And it was interesting. I said to him, I said, well, you know, I have the same thing happen to me. And he said, what, you do? And I said, well, yeah. I said, you know, I was walking down the beach the other day. I'm in Florida right now. I was walking down the beach and I didn't have my shirt on, and my shorts. And there were three young girls. It was spring break and they were on a blanket. And as I walked by, they laughed. And I immediately thought, oh my God, you know, I got to get in shape. You know, they're laughing at me, you know, and I really began to feel real self-conscious and whatever. And and I said, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And he actually felt good about that. Oh God, I've got somebody that no, I realized that my little example, if I went and told a therapist, he probably wouldn't label me paranoid personality, but it's the same thing, just at a different level that a psychologist or psychiatrist would put a diagnostic label on. This guy is having thoughts that are creating these illusions. I said, well, have you ever gone out with your wife and had dinner where you thought somebody was looking at you and it didn't bother you? He said, well, yeah, that's happened a couple of times. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I remember the other one time there was this real meal I was looking forward to. And right when I was looking over and I could see those guys were looking at me. And then my food came and I was so happy to see the food that I just didn't think about it. Now, he had no idea that what had happened was he got distracted from his own thoughts, got into the moment with his food and moved into mental health. That's what happened. So we're living in this experience. We've got this built-in signal that will tell us whenever we're misusing the system. And all that means is all of a sudden we've gotten hit with some less healthy thoughts. We're having a little uncomfortable feeling. Maybe our perceptions are becoming distorted somewhat. And that's a signal that do our best to see it for what it is, unless the psychological system is designed to rebalance. It's the same as the physical system. If you're out running a mile and your heart's beating like mad, and then you rest, your physical system will rebalance. It's designed to. It's the same thing with the psychospiritual system. It will rebalance and bring us back into health. So, you know, in this paper that we're writing, and this is a paper to positive psychology, trying to see here what the title is. Well, I don't have the title, but it's a paper. We're asking positive psychology, giving them another invitation to take a look at the principles. And hopefully, as a result of all these criticisms that the field is getting, maybe there'll be a little bit more openness. Because one of the criticisms was that positive psychology has not looked all that carefully at the spiritual side. And when it has, interestingly, it's looked at ways to help people develop spiritual values from the outside in. In fact, Seligman and Peterson have a book out that is the positive psychology comparable book to the DSM-5 of the field of psychiatry. Where they're taking the positive side, the mental health side, and putting it into a book of people who lack certain virtues, and then what you need to do to build up those virtues in somebody.
Thomas, I think it's interesting that you mentioned these spiritual values, or in my mind, which I would say is almost qualities of well-being, which we are born with innate, and that positive psychology is actually pointing people outwards to go and develop those qualities, as
Yeah.
opposed to inwards as a default setting, so to speak.
Yeah. And, we're not, all we're saying, Jack kind of put it this way. He said, the techniques and tools and rituals that positive psychology teaches people are going to work as long as the person who has learned them thinks that they're going to work. And as soon as they stop thinking that they're going to work, it's like meditation is a big deal now. And I don't meditate personally. I know a lot of people who know the principles do meditate, and there are deeper and deeper levels of mental quietude. And I'm sure meditation can put people into deep levels, and people can get great insights while they're in them. But when they come out of the meditation, if they don't understand how the system works, they're going to go right back into the thinking that had them look at meditation as a way to avoid.
So, Tom, in your view, what will it take for modern psychology to catch on to the principles?
Well, it would take the same thing as what it would take for an individual to catch on to the principles. I remember Jack Pransky and I wrote a paper on trying to put the intervention that's grounded in the principles into certain parts. Not so people who practice this or who teach it would try to emulate what we said. But the only way people are going to get an insight that relates to this, and once you get it, it's hard to imagine why it's so hard for people to get it. But a lot of people are living. For a lot of people, their thought system, their schema, their belief system is using up their life to prove that it's right. I'm doing a paper now on personality disorders. And people with personality disorders are the title of the paper is The Manifestation of Egos Running Wild. These people, in order to cope typically with very chaotic childhoods, a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, have developed egos that they're either the best in the world or the worst in the world. I remember Albert Ellis, the old psychologist who started rational emotive therapy. Some of you may remember him. He said there's two ways that people can do themselves in. One, either they deify themselves or they vilify themselves. And what he's talking about there is ego. You can imagine a positive psychologist who has devoted their life to an inside-out understanding. They've got tons of research papers getting more evidence that their way of viewing mental health or mental illness is right. So how do you get those people? I guess what I'm looking at myself. I think the reason that I was open to this understanding, well, there's probably more than one reason. Number one, I was looking for my own happiness. But number two, in some way, I just knew that psychology was just not on the right track. I didn't have all my worth. I was publishing really for the publisher perish thing in the beginning. You know, I was going into my classes on delinquency and crime. I taught in the criminology department at the university, and realized I was saying the same old stuff over and over and over again, and nothing new was happening. And so I was open to something new. So how do you get people to know? Well, I think number one, you have to. We wrote the paper in a very positive way so as not to turn these people off. You know, we didn't slam them with more criticism. I think you have to make people feel relaxed so that the connection with their ego kind of dissipates. And then I think people are more likely to see something new. I'm surprised we haven't had more people, scholars from the field or whatever. I mean, the principles is really a grassroots kind of thing, which I think is wonderful. I mean, look at all the books that we've got written by people who don't have PhDs or MAs, but they've been touched by this. And we have all these books out there. I feel privileged to have seen this early on and to have written as much as I've written. But, you know, it's like looking at psychology through a new lens. So I'm doing forgiveness now because the whole field is wondering, why can't more people forgive? I'm doing a paper on personality disorders. Psychologists hate to work with people with personality disorders because they're self-centered and they're obnoxious, and they're tied to their egos, and eventually they'll drive therapists crazy if you don't understand the innocence. Just got a paper out now on maladaptive repetitive thought. Maladaptive repetitive thought. What is repetitive thought? It's holding certain thoughts in mind and rethinking them over and over and over again. That's wonderful. If you're going to learn how to tell time or how to tie your shoes or how to do martial arts, you've got to think about it. You know, Tiger Woods, who was just at the Masters tournament the other day, you know, amazing 10 years of golf. When he went to the driving range, he would use repetitive thought to think about it. But when he went to the first tee, he moved in, for the most part, into this natural primary thought. And that's why he was so great. So what is maladaptive repetitive thought? This simply means things like ruminating, worrying, overanalyzing, misusing the power of thought, and the field calls it maladaptive repetitive thought. And one researcher wrote, what's wrong with people? Look at all the negative consequences that are associated with maladaptive repetitive thought. Maladaptive repetitive thought is associated with virtually every form of psychopathology. And the field cannot figure out why people keep using it. Why would they keep worrying? Why would they keep ruminating? Well, because people ruminate and do all those things as a way to cope. They'll get a discomforting feeling and then they'll try to figure out how to get out of it. And most people don't understand the innate health that we have in us. And so that's one of the most underused resources.
Yeah. We just got a question from Devesh. Devesh, do you want me to read it or do you want to speak to it?
Hi, Ron. Hello, Dr. Kelly. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I'm in Sydney, and if there's one thing which drove me to the three principles about a few years ago and still keeping me stuck in some groove is what you just beautifully mentioned, maladaptive repetitive thought. Uh, I was calling it in my words, obsessive compulsive disorder on the misuse of the gift of thought. And I'm just stuck in that so many times a day, and the principal understanding kicks in once in a while to dislodge me from that. But it is as quick, this maladaptive, repetitive thought to come in and remove you from the presence of where you are right now, or get stuck in a groove of worry and rumination and overthinking. And so, yeah, so my question was basically, which direction? I know it's your insight, and I need mine. I mean, I don't know, but I've been I think I need to get my insight around it, talking to various other 3P. But is there a way or a reading or you mentioned a paper, but it's probably a scientific paper. But so to ease this insight within myself, a resonance making presence somewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, it reminds me, I'm working with a young man today who has been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and we'll see an ad on the news or something that will trigger some thoughts that he has, where he actually thinks that there are demons and evil spirits out there. And good guy, smart, and but has been taking these thoughts to heart for years. And it's an interesting one. I kind of look at it this way. If somewhere down the line, we started to get thoughts that became a habit, about washing our hands or locking the door or what have you. In fact, I remember Michael Neal in my book talking about a woman who was very intelligent, very bright, but she would take a bus to work, and then about halfway there, she would think, "Oh, I didn't lock the door," and so she would get off the bus, take another one back home, and she would come into work late often. They liked her at work though, so they kept her there, and she would stay late, get her work done, and what have you. And she went to see Michael, and she told Michael, and Michael said, "Yeah, I understand. I would do the same thing." And she said to Michael, "Oh my God, I've seen 5 psychologists before you, and everybody's told me, to stop doing that, and you're telling me," and Michael said, "No." He said, "If I was riding the bus and it looked that way to me, I'd turn around and go home too." And it was a great example of how, instead of judging her, he just simply talked to her about thought. And really, change only comes really with an insight. And I'm wondering, I'm not all that sure. you know, the OCD is tricky. You know, I'm just wondering if over time, if you're taking unhealthy thoughts or disordered thoughts, and you're telling your brain that they're true or that they're right, okay? The brain is just a biological computer. The brain has no wisdom. So if you're telling the brain that these thoughts are the truth, then the brain is just going to keep on giving them back to you. You know, like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. And over time, you know, you're going to train your brain to just kind of give you the, I mean, I think about quitting smoking. I mean, I only smoked for 7 years. I smoked from age 19 to 26. But when I decided to quit smoking, my brain gave me urges to smoke often. Time and time and time again, every hour. And I had this urge to light up. But I had made up my mind back then that I was going to quit. So I did my best. I distracted myself. I chewed gum. I ate lifesavers. I sucked on a pipe that had tobacco in it. I even did these Tiparillo cigars that you don't inhale. I ended up gaining 15 pounds because I ate. And what I found was over time, those urges went down. Finally, I was at the juvenile court where I was working. And back then we had to go down to the mail room to get the mail. And I got the mail, and the mail lady down there, I was walking out and she said, "Ooh, Dr. Kelly, your ass is getting mighty wide." And I thought, well, I guess I better stop eating. You know, it's time to stop that. So it took about a year before I stopped getting the urges because I trained my brain. So I don't know, that's my only experience where I could kind of relate that to OCD, where, my God, if people have been rethinking these compulsive thoughts for years, then they've innocently trained their brain. And that's why in some cases medication can be helpful. This guy who I'm talking to told me he was, maybe you've heard of this, he was using a medication. It was not a prescription, but one you could buy at a drugstore. Yeah, called Kratom. And this, when he used it, it's kind of a natural opioid, and it quieted his mind. And he felt better. See, I don't have any problem with medication for people, but you see, people have got to understand what we're talking about. It would be like if I broke my arm and I had to go to physical therapy, and the therapist had to kind of screw it with my arm, okay? And he said, okay, we're going to give you some pain medication so you don't feel the pain as much while I'm doing this. That's kind of how I see psychotropic medication as being helpful. But I don't know. I mean, there's some research that says that over time, what happens is you have these uncomfortable thoughts, and some people have a part of their brain called the amygdala, or the emotional part or whatever, that's more sensitive to those thoughts. And then those thoughts kind of get stuck there, and they don't go into the prefrontal cortex. So I don't know if there's, after a while, if it doesn't affect your brain to some extent or whatever, who knows? I don't know. But I don't know if what I said was helpful at all in terms of, yeah.
Thank you. Just one last word before. It's just that I attend or participate in a lot of conversations in the three principles, whether it's Linda and George Pransky, and you resonate individually. Each one has got our own and I particularly with Judy Sedgman, Chris Heath, and Mavis Karn,
Yeah.
and it's just, and one of the things which is common, I mean, I'm not saying their insight is their insight, but the common was a very simple ode from Mavis from Minnesota, and Judy and all of them say, Linda Prensky just said, you as you say, I think insight time. That's what will dislodge this. And
Yeah.
the other the other wonderful spiritual presence was just, you seem to think these thoughts are useful. And and Chris, she said something very clear about 3 weeks. It took all this going. She goes, do you find like not being in the present, you're finding reassurance in revisiting that thinking in the moment again and again and again and again? And that's a delusion of sorts, Divya. So just play with that. That's a delusion. You're removing yourself from the present to enter your personal thinking to find reassurance when all that personal thinking is an illusion. And that's where I am, and I have full faith in this, in the principles, and all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. 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 A lot of the things that we get into that are labeled psychopathological or whatever are really ways to cope. I remember Jim Carrey, the comedian, went through some horrible depression. In fact, he's got some interesting videos on YouTube talking about that. And he refers to depression as deep rest and sees it as kind of a way to cope because he was so caught up in other thinking that depression was actually helpful as a way to cope with that. And you can understand people that go into their own delusional worlds, and people with personality disorders that I mentioned before. There's this one lady who came in to see me, and she said, "You're my fifth psychologist." And I'm not sure how I was supposed to feel about that, but okay. And she said, "Yeah, all the others gave me horrible prognoses." And so my ego kind of clicked in, and I said, "Well, I mean, I've got kind of a new way of seeing things, and some people that I've seen who had bad prognoses really ended up turning their lives around." And she said, "Oh no," she said, "no, whatever it is you have will not work with me." She said, "Nobody has had the adversity that I have, and my life will never turn around." And had I not understood what we're talking about, I might have thought, well, then what the hell are you here for? What do you think I'm going to do for you if you have that attitude? But I realized this is her claim to fame. This is how she is special. And once I got to know her background, I could see why she picked something to be special, because at least it made her not live in the memories and what she had made the past mean. Still, it's much nicer to work with people who are open-minded and and want to hear something new, but that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. I just want to see if there's any last question before we wrap up for today. I guess that's a no. Firstly, everyone, thank you for attending. Thank you for joining the call. Dr. Thomas Kelly, thank you again. That's really appreciated that you making the time to come on and share. There was a lot in that conversation. I would encourage everyone here to rewatch the recording. And again, really simplistic, to the point. Really enjoy and love having you on these calls. So thank you again. Really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you. And thanks, everybody. Appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Thomas.
Wish
Thank
you
you.
all the best.
Ron.
Okay,
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks,
you're
everyone.
welcome.
Thanks so much. Take care,
Okay.
everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thanks,
Bye,
Rowan.
everybody.
You too, my friend.
Tom.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Bye.